Hi, I'm Monty the Software Engineer, and this is going to be part 2 of a series where I'm recreating the Tesla Infotainment UI within Qt and QML. If you haven't seen the last video, I do recommend you go check that out. We went through a little overview of the existing Tesla UI, kind of get a look and feel of how it works, as well as go through and set up the initial framework for our UI. In that video, we implemented this left-hand screen and right-hand screen, as well as a bottom bar. Along the top here, we have some text and an icon indicating lock and unlock. All this is provided to us by a C++ class and not hard-coded. So if you want to get up to speed with what we've done so far and you haven't seen the last video, go ahead and check that out. So let's go ahead and dig right into it. One thing that I did notice earlier today, when it's something like 7:07 a.m., it doesn't actually show the 0 part. Here you don't see the 0 part either. It would just show 7:07 a.m. So that is a little bug that we have in the code, and we can fix that by doing our hour, minute here. So if we rerun that, that will fix our issue. So we don't really see it now because it's 48, but if it was 7:08 a.m., it would show 7:08 instead of 7:08 a.m. All right, now let's go ahead and implement this search navigation box here. I'm going to make a new component and put it in the right-hand side of the screen. And I'm going to start out by making a rectangle. So since this component is only going to be used within our right screen component, I'm actually going to just create it and put it in the right screen folder. Let's create a new QML file, and we'll want it in the UI right screen folder. And let's call this navigation searchbox.qml. Cool. And let's start out with a rectangle. ID, we'll say nav search box. And now let's go ahead and take a look. So this is going to be somewhat of kind of like a gray white color. And to get that color, I usually just go to Google and look up color picker. And let's see, I'll find one that I think looks good. I think that looks good. So I'll copy this hex value here and I'll give this color. All right. And now for the anchors and width and height for the component, I'll actually go and do that when I create the component instead of putting it in this component code. That way it's a little more reusable. So the only other thing I think I want to do now is put a radius on this rectangle. So let's go ahead and put a radius of 5. All right, now let's go to our right screen. And actually let's run qmake since we added a new QML file. And since this navigation searchbox.qml file is in the same directory as the right screen.qml, we can actually just go ahead and use this component by using its name. So let's go here, navigation search box. There we go. And let's call it nav search box. All right, now let's set up some anchors for it. We can see here, we can probably anchor the left side to the left side of the lock screen icon. And then the top of the navigation search box, I'll just anchor off the bottom of that lock screen, the lock icon. And then give it a top margin to give it a little bit of spacing. I won't add any left margin since it looks like it lines up pretty well. So let's go ahead and do that. Anchors left, we're going to say is our lock icon dot left, and top we will anchor off the lock icon dot bottom and give it a top margin of 20. Actually, let's do 15. Okay, and the last thing we want to do is set up the width and height of this component. So for the width, I think I'll do about 1/3 of this screen, since it looks like it's about 1/3. I think that will be good. And then for the height, I'll just try something out like 1/12 and see how it looks. So let's go ahead and do that. Width I said is going to be parent.width times 1/3. And the height, let's do parent.height times 1/12. All right, now we can run that and see how it looks. All right, that actually looks pretty good, I think. It's kind of hard to see with this map color background and this box. So I'm actually going to change the map plugin from open source maps to, I think, Mapbox GL might look a little better. Let's go here and we'll do Mapbox GL and let's run that and see how it looks. All right, so the Mapbox GL, I actually kind of like this map look a little better. I think with the Mapbox GL, right now, since I'm in a development environment, I can use it. But I think if I wanted to actually use it in a production environment, I would have to possibly purchase some kind of license. So if you end up using Mapbox GL, just make sure that you look into what the licensing entails and pricing if there is any. But let's go ahead and actually change this color a little bit to make it, I think, a little more gray. All right, let's try this one. Let's go down to, actually, let's go into our navigation search box and change this color, and let's see how that looks. All right, I think that looks a little better. I think you can see it a little better, but our margins are set up good, and I actually like the width and height that it is set to as well. So now let's go ahead and add this search icon here. So I'll go to flat icon here, and let's search for search. Should be a magnifying glass. This one looks pretty good. Let's edit the icon, and we want a little more of a gray color, I think. Actually, let's make it a little darker so that it looks better on the search box. All right, I think that looks good. We'll copy this to keep it for the text color as well. But let's go ahead and download this. Free download. And now we'll go to our downloads folder. Let's grab that search and put it into our assets folder. All right, and then in our QRC file, let's go ahead and add an existing file and grab that search.png. Good. And now in our navigation search box, let's go ahead and add an image. And we'll call this search icon. Let's set the source to this search.png. And let's actually run qmake since we added a new file to our QRC file. All right, and now let's take a look at how we want to set up this search icon. So within the context of the navigation search box where this search icon lives, looks like it'll be vertically centered within it, and then left margin, or I'm sorry, the left anchor will be anchored to the left of the parent with a pretty significant margin. So I think I'll try something like 25 for the left margin. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's do anchors, left, parent.left, left margin, something like 25, and then vertical center, we'll do parent.vertical center. Now the last thing we want to do is the width and height of it. The height, I think I'll do about 45% of the height of the parent. And then I will leave the width, but set the fill mode so that it'll scale accordingly. So let's do height, parent.height times 0.45. And then fill mode, let's do image.preserve aspect fit. Okay, and I think we should be able to run that. Okay, so here we can see the search icon within our search navigation box, and I think that looks pretty good, so I won't change any of the anchors or the width and height of it. Let's go back to our screenshot here, and then this navigation search text here will be kind of like a placeholder text. So let's go ahead and add that in now. It'll just be text that's aligned vertically within this parent here and be the same color as the search icon. So let's actually grab that color that we had here and then go back to our navigation search box QML, and let's add a text component here. And we'll just call this navigation placeholder text. Set the color of it to that value we copied. We'll set the text to say navigate, I think it was. Let's just make sure. Yes. All right, and now let's set up some anchors. We said the vertical center was going to be in the parent.vertical center. The left of it is going to be to the right of the search icon. And let's give it a left margin of about 20. And let's see how that looks. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now we have this navigation search box here with this navigate placeholder text and the search icon. So now what we're going to want to do is put kind of a text input here. And whenever we use the text input, we want this navigate placeholder text to go invisible. So I think I'm going to put a text input here that will have the same height as the parent. And then for the width of it, I'm going to have it set by the anchors. So I'll anchor the right of the text input to the parent right, and then the left of it to the right of this search icon. And that should set up the width. So let's go ahead and put text input here. ID, we'll call this navigation text input. And the anchors, we said top will be parent.top. Bottom is parent.bottom. Right, we said parent right. And then the left will do the search icon dot right. And we'll give it a left margin of 20. So now if we run this, here we go. And we have a input here. So we can see that the input is actually in the top left of the text input component. So we're going to want to change the alignment of it at the very least to have the vertical alignment within the vertical of the component itself. So let's go do that. Vertical alignment text.align vcenter. And then let's also make this text a little bigger. Let's do something like 16-point font. So font.pixel size, we'll do 16. All right. Let's put some text in here. Okay, I think that looks really good. So the last thing we want to do on this is let's make the navigate placeholder text not visible whenever there's text in the text input. So let's go ahead and do that. In our navigation placeholder text, let's add a visible property here. Visible, and we only want it visible when the text of navigation text input is equal to nothing. So let's actually do that. We'll do this dot text equals to nothing. So if there's any text within our navigation text input, this navigate text should be invisible. And then when we delete everything, it should become visible again. So let's try that out. All right, so we have our navigate placeholder text here. If we click it, it's still good. And then the second we put something in, you can see that it has disappeared. And then when we delete it, it comes back. And I think the only other thing is potentially there might be some clipping if the text is too long. So let's see. Yes, so this will overrun the parent if the text is too long. So I think if we just set clip to true here, that should change it. All right, so now let's go here and do the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Good. So now we can see that if the text is overrunning the width of the text input, it won't go over our other component. It will clip accordingly, but we can always go back as well and see all the text. And if we select all and delete, placeholder text comes back, which is good. So now I think I'm going to take a little break from the right-hand screen since it's fleshed out pretty well. And I'm going to go ahead and add some components to the bottom bar here, just to give it some more visual items here. So let's go down here and let's take a look. We have temperature controls for the driver side and the passenger side, volume control, as well as some quick icons here. I think I'll actually just leave the icons out. I don't think going around searching for icons is going to be that exciting. So let's go ahead and just do the temperature control for right now. First, I think I'm going to set up a C++ class that will handle the temperature setting for the driver side and the passenger side. So let's go ahead in our controllers, add a new C++ class here, choose, and we want it to actually live not in our UI folder, but in our controllers. And the class name, let's just call it HVAC handler. Let's inherit QObject, next, and finish. So for the HVAC handler class, we're just going to have a Q property here for the target temperature. So let's go ahead and add a Q property, and it will be int and target temperature. Good. And then let's add a private keyword here so that when we generate our missing Q property members, it will put it in private. Good. Now let's move this over to the C++ and do the same thing with the setter. Good. And now in our constructor, let's set up the initial value for M target temperature, and let's just call it 70. Good. I think we'll need one more method in this HVAC handler class, and that will be to handle increasing and decreasing the value of this target temperature. If you haven't seen my other videos, the way we expose a method to QML is using this QInvocable macro, and we'll do void increment target temperature, and we'll give it a constant val. So we can use just one method to increase and decrease the target temperature by passing either a -1 or a +1 to the method. Let's go ahead and add this into our C++, and let's say int new target temp equals our current temp plus our val. So if we pass a -1, it'll actually just subtract a 1 from here, or if we pass a +1, it will increase this. And now let's go ahead and set our target temperature to our new target temp. So I think that will take care of increasing and decreasing, and we have a target temperature. So for our uses, we're going to actually have two instances of HVAC handler, one for the driver side and one for the passenger side. So let's go to our main.cpp, and we'll add the header file. And then here, let's create two instances of it, one for the driver and one for the passenger. So we'll say HVAC handler M driver HVAC handler, and then one for the passenger HVAC handler M passenger HVAC handler. Okay, and then let's set our context property here. Actually, we can just copy this twice. And for the driver side, let's just call this driver HVAC. And for passenger, we'll call it passenger HVAC. Here we'll pass in the driver HVAC handler, and here we'll pass in the passenger HVAC handler. So let's go back to our screenshot here. So what we're going to do is add an HVAC component here that will have a button for the decrement, a button for the increment, and then a text display for the actual target temperature. So I think I'll just make one component that I'll reuse, one for here and then one here. So let's go ahead and create a new component in our bottom bar. Cute QML file. We want this to live in our UI bottom bar folder, and let's just call this HVAC component.qml. Good. So how I think I'm going to make this is I'm going to have a rectangle here, text, and then a rectangle here, and then the rectangle itself will have a mouse area that will capture input and then decrease or increase depending on which one they click. So let's go ahead and add that here, rectangle, and we'll call this the decrement button, decrement button. And let's take a look again to see what we want to do for anchors, widths, and heights. So if we consider this whole unit here as our HVAC component and look at the decrement button, the left of it will anchor to the left of the actual HVAC component, and then the height of it will be probably the same height as our HVAC component, which will set to the height of the bottom bar as well. So let's go ahead and do all of that. So let's do anchors and say left is parent.left, and then the top is going to be parent.top, and bottom is going to be parent.bottom. So since we set the top and bottom anchors, that will take care of the height of this decrement button. And as long as we set the height of the actual HVAC component to the height of the status bar, it'll make this decrement button the same height as that. So the only thing that we need to set is the actual width of this component. And I think let's just try half of the actual height of it. So let's do that. Width is going to be height divided by 2. And so that we can visualize it, see how it looks, let's give it a color of orange. So let's run QMake actually, since we added this new component here. And in our bottom bar, let's go ahead and add a new HVAC component. And we'll call this passenger HVAC control. And let's take a look. So the HVAC control itself will set a left anchor to the right of this car icon and give it a really big left margin. And then we'll set the top and bottom anchor to the top and bottom of the bottom bar. That will set up the height of it as well. Let's go anchors. Top is parent.top, bottom is parent.bottom, and again the parent of this HVAC component is the bottom bar itself. So left, let's do car settings icon.right, and left margin, let's start out with 150, and let's see how that looks. Okay, so here we can see our HVAC component, and we can see our decrement button, which actually looks pretty good as long as we set that color to black and then add some text like a left arrow in there. I think that will look really good. So let's go back to our HVAC component. Let's change this back to black, and then let's actually add some text in here, and we'll call this decrement text, and this will be centered, center in our parent. So we're going to have this decrement text centered within our decrement button here. And then let's say the text is going to be this left arrow. And let's set font.pixel size to, let's try 12. See how that looks. Oh, and the color. So for the color, let's actually grab that same color that we use in our navigation search box. So this color right here. And let's see how that looks. All right, so that looks good in terms of size. It is a little bit on the dark side with this black background. So actually let's go back to the color picker and set it to a lighter color. Let's try this one and put it here. And before we test that out, let's go ahead and add that target temperature text as well right here. So let's put a new component here, text, and we'll call this target temperature text. And let's take a look at the anchors of it. The left of it will be to the right of the decrement button. And then the vertical center, we can actually just do vertical center of the actual HVAC component as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Anchors. Left is going to be decrement button dot right. Left margin, let's just add 15. And then vertical center, let's do parent dot vertical center. And then for the text color, we're actually going to want all this to be the same color. So let's go ahead and just add a property here. property string font color, and we'll grab this here so that we can just use font color here and then the same one here. Color, font color. And this way, anytime we want to change the color of the HVAC component, we don't have to go in and change it everywhere. We can just change it up here and it'll be applied to the whole component. Now for the pixel size, it's going to be quite big. So let's change this pixel size to something like 24. Font.pixel size 24. And for right now, the text, let's hard code it to 70, and we'll actually set it to the HVAC handler later. So let's see how that looks. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I think the only other thing that we want to do is let's add the increment button. So we can just copy this here, down here. We'll call this the increment button. And then let's take a look at the anchors. The left of it will be to the right of the text here, and we'll give it the same margin that we gave this from this, so that it will be equidistant over here. So let's go ahead and do that. Left is going to be our target temperature, right. And we'll leave the top and bottom margin, so we'll set up the height of this increment button. Let's add that left margin, which will match this one here, which is 15. And the text we'll call increment text, and we'll change this to a right arrow. And now let's see how that looks. All right, that looks really good. And now let's just add one for our passenger side. So let's go take a look. There's a volume icon here that we can probably anchor off of, but for right now, let's just put it in, and we'll adjust the anchors later. So let's go to our bottom bar. All right, so let's copy this whole component here. All right, so actually this should be our driver HVAC control, and this will be our passenger HVAC control. So for the passenger one, let's just change the right margin to our parent.right and give it a right margin of 150. And later when we put the volume icon, we'll adjust this passenger HVAC control to anchor off of that. But for right now, this will just be a placeholder. So let's take a look at that. Okay, good. So now we have a driver side HVAC control and a passenger side HVAC control. Now let's go ahead and add the connections in so that this here only affects our driver HVAC controller, and this one here only affects our passenger HVAC controller. All right, so since we're using the same HVAC component for both our driver side and passenger side, we can't just go into our HVAC component here, for example, and target temperature, say this driver HVAC dot target temperature. If we did this, the driver side and passenger side would always read the same value and not have independent control. So let's go back. Actually, we need to change that anyways, but let's add a property here. Property var HVAC controller. And in our bottom bar, let's set that property for our driver HVAC control here. HVAC controller will be our driver HVAC. And then in our passenger, we'll say HVAC controller is passenger HVAC. So now when we're in our HVAC component, all we have to do is reference this HVAC controller variable, and it will utilize the correct one. So here for our target temperature, let's do HVAC controller dot target temperature. And now that should reference this target temperature Q property of our respective HVAC controller, whether we're in the driver side or passenger side. So let's first make sure that this shows 70 for both. All right, so we're seeing 70 for both. And to make sure that they're independent, let's go ahead and implement the increment and decrement buttons. So for our decrement button, let's add a mouse area that fills the entire button. And then on clicked, we'll have it do the HVAC controller. And let's see what we named that method. HVAC handler.h is increment target temperature. So let's actually just copy that and add it here. And we'll pass it a -1. Now let's go ahead and copy this down to our increment button. And we'll pass it a +1. So now we should have the increment and decrement functionality implemented, and they should only control their respective HVAC controllers. So the passenger side should only increment and decrement the passenger HVAC handler, and likewise the driver side should only control the driver side HVAC controller. So let's go ahead and run that. All right, so now we have our driver side here. If we decrease this, we can see that we've set the driver side to a target temperature of 62, but the passenger side is still set to 70, and we can increase the 70, and we can see that the passenger side is still independent of the driver side. So this is working well. All right, so the last thing I think I'm going to implement on this bottom bar is going to be this volume control here. Again, I think I'm going to leave out these quick access icons. They would really just be me looking for icons, putting them in here. And I think the functionality of them aren't going to be in the scope of this series. So we'll just handle the audio for right now. So if we take a look at the audio icon here, it's going to be very similar to what we have for our HVAC component, where we have the increment, the decrement and the increment buttons, and then this icon here. So let's go ahead and actually look for a volume icon. So let's go to flat icon as always, and let's search for volume. So I like something like this. I hope that there's one with just a single bar. Okay, so here we can see a volume 1, and then that other one was a volume 2. So I think we'll just have 2 levels. Maybe if there's a third one, we can use that. But I don't see it. So let's just do 2 volume levels for the indicator icon. So let's download this, free download. Okay, and then let's go ahead and download that first one, which was a 2 here, free download. Let's go to our downloads and let's take a look at this. This is the 2, so let's just call this audio2.png. And this is audio 1, so let's call this audio 1. Let's copy these and put them into our Tesla Infotainment UI and our assets. Then let's go ahead and add that here, add existing files, audio, open. All right, and then let's run QMake. And now before we do the QML component, let's go ahead and add a new C++ class, and we'll call this audio controller, and we'll have the base class be QObject and make sure that it lives in the correct folder, which is going to be under our controller. Oh, back. Actually, I think it's controllers. Yep, controllers. Okay, controllers, next, and finish. All right, and now let's add a Q property that will keep track of our volume level. Q property, and this will be an int, and we'll call this volume level. Okay, and then let's add our private keyword, and then generate the missing Q property members. Let's put this in the C++, as well as this one. And just like how we had in our HVAC handler, where we had the increment function, we'll do the same thing here. Use the QInvocable keyword, and then increment volume val, and then let's go ahead and refactor that. C++ requires, oh, forgot the void keyword. Here we go. And now let's add that here. And we'll do int new volume equals m volume level plus val. Again, if we pass in a negative value, it would just decrement this. Let's just make sure it doesn't go below 0 and above 100. So we'll do if new volume is less than or equal to 0, we'll just set new volume equal to 0. Likewise, if new volume is greater than or equal to 100, just set new volume to 100. And then let's set our volume level to new volume. All right, and that's good. Now that I'm thinking about it, 0 should probably have a mute icon. So let's, and this looks good. So I'll download this one. All right, and then let's go ahead and add that. So mute, let's copy that. And in our Tesla Infotainment UI assets, put that in there. And let's add it here, add existing files and our mute. And then let's run QMake. All right. And now, since this is going to be living in our bottom bar, I'm just going to add it in our bottom bar folder. Let's go ahead and add a new QML file. It's going to live in UI bottom bar. Oddly enough, if we enter in a path here that isn't valid, we can see that it is red, but when we were doing it in our C++ class creation, it didn't give us the same visual indicator. So hopefully they fix that. But anyways, let's call this the volume control component.qml. There we go. Since the volume control component is pretty similar to our HVAC control component, let's just go ahead and grab everything from our HVAC component and put it in our volume control component to give us something to work off of. And let's just comment out first the increment and decrement control, because that is something that we'll have to change. And then target temperature text, let's actually change this to an image. And this will be our volume icon. We don't need any of this. All right, so let's, for right now, set the audio 2 as the default icon. So we'll do source. There we go. And I think let's remove this HVAC controller here. All right, so I think that's good for right now. Let's go ahead and add this to our bottom bar. Right here, let's do volume control component. ID, we'll just call this the volume control. All right, and now let's give it the same kind of anchors as we have set up for the car settings icon, but instead of doing the left with the parent left, we'll do the right with the parent right. So let's go up to our car settings icon. Let's grab this anchor here, and we'll copy and paste it, and we'll do right is parent.right and right margin. Now let's see how that looks. All right, so we see something here, I think, but this HVAC control component is overlapping with it. So let's make sure that we set this just like we set the anchors of here. So let's see the passenger HVAC now, instead of the parent right, it's going to be this volume control left. And let's see how that looks. Okay, so it did not look like it changed much. So let's comment this out for right now so that it's not overlapping in any way, and make sure that this is working properly. All right, so let's run this and see if we can see anything. All right, so still seeing some weird stuff happen here, as well as something going on here. So let's go ahead and change the color of the decrement button to orange, and then the color of the increment button to blue, and see what's happening here. All right, not seeing anything still, so let's go ahead and check on what's going on. Decrement button, parent left, All right. Looks good. Decrement text, volume icon here, increment button. Left is all right. So the left should actually be our volume icon. Dot right. That's the dangers of copy and pasting from one component to another. Let's see what that has changed. So we're seeing this decrement button here, but still not looking good. So let's go to our bottom bar. Let's see, right, vertical center. All right, so I'm not sure that I set the height of this. So let's do, since we have the vertical center set up, we don't need that. Let's do top is parent.top and bottom is parent.bottom. All right, so we're seeing our decrement button here, but nothing else over here. So let's just see our volume control. The right of it is our parent right. The right margin is going to be 30, and we have our heights set up, so that's good. Let's go to our volume control component and the increment button. All right, so for the increment button, let's actually just set the right to parent.right and right margin to 15. Oh, and then actually we don't probably need a right margin. Now let's shift everything, since this whole component is going to be anchoring towards the right. Let's see what happens if we change everything to right oriented margins. So right margin, and this will be off of the increment button dot left. And then for our decrement button, let's just leave that the way it is and see what happens. All right, so we're seeing our increment button now, a very big volume icon, and then a decrement button as well. All right, and so this is actually the wrong color. It should be white. So we got to go back and download all white components. I'll go ahead and do that off screen so it's not too long. All right, so now I've downloaded all these white versions of the controls instead, and let's see what's going on here. So the volume icon, we do not have any width or heights set up for it. So let's go to here. Let's do about, I think 50% of our height. So let's do height is going to be parent.height times 0.5. And then fill mode, let's do image.preserve aspect fit. And then for the decrement, let's go ahead and set the anchors right to our audio icon. What do we call it? Volume icon. Volume icon dot left. And then we'll do a right margin of 15. Now let's see how that looks. All right, so now we can see here we have our volume icon, we have the decrement and increment buttons. So that's good. Let's go ahead and add the HVAC control back in right here, uncomment it, and then we'll also go into our volume control component and let's change the colors back to black. And let's see how that looks. All right, so we're still having some overlapping here. So let's see what's going on.
2 hours later.
All right, so I've been doing a little debugging off to the side. I didn't record it all because it was taking a little bit of time. But I think the reason why we're getting some conflicting anchors is the component, the way that we have it set up, there's no width to it. So when we try to anchor off of the right side of it, it doesn't work super well. So I think we're gonna have to define a width here for the actual component, the HVAC component. We have everything set up for the children of the component. However, this item itself has no width. So when we're trying to anchor off of it, QML doesn't really know how to do that. So the way that I'm going to actually set a width for this is by taking its existing width that we have set up here and then making it relative to the current width. And it might sound confusing, but I think it'll make a little more sense as we implement it. So let's go ahead and do it, and we'll see how that works. So first I want to grab the actual width of this component as it displays here. So I'm going to make a rectangle, and I'm going to set up anchors for it. The left of it, I'm going to have as the decrement button dot left, and then the right of it will be the increment button dot right. So now this rectangle here, which is just a temporary rectangle right now for us to see what the component width is. This rectangle has a left anchor to the left of this button and a right anchor to the right of this increment button. So now when the component is completed, let's console.log our width. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so now the width of this component is actually 90. And that's when the width of the screen is 1280. So if we hard code a value of 90 for the width of this component, if we end up for some reason changing the width of the screen, it's still going to think that the item itself is width 90 if we hard code just a plain 90 in there. So to get around that, let's make this width is going to be 90 times parent.width divided by 1280. So we have this 90 here hard coded for our preferred width, which is 1280. So if we didn't make any changes to the size of the application when it runs, the parent.width, which is the bottom bar width, should be 1280. So when it's 1280, it'll be 1280 divided by 1280, which will be 1. So the width of this item will remain 90 as long as this parent.width is 1280. But as we scale the actual width, it will scale this ratio here accordingly and then adjust the 90 to what it should be. So let's see how this works out. All right, so it still looks good. And we'll do the same thing on this volume control component where we set up a width for the item that holds it as well. So let's go to our volume control component. Let's first grab what that width is, rectangle, and we'll set anchors. Left is decrement button dot left, and right is our increment button dot right. And now when the component is completed, we want to console.log our width. All right, and that is 120. So the same thing here, we'll set a width of 120 times a ratio of our parent dot width divided by 1280. All right, so now that this has a width and our HVAC component has a width, we can go back to our bottom bar and we should be able to uncomment this out and have the right of this HVAC control anchored to the left of the volume control, and hopefully that works. All right, there we go. Now we can see that this passenger HVAC control is now being anchored properly off of the volume control, since this whole component now has a valid width that we can have a right edge to anchor off of. So here we go. This still works and this still works. And we haven't implemented this volume control yet, so let's go ahead and implement that. So first, I think in our main.cpp, we need to include our audio controller, audio controller, and now let's create an object, audio controller, and we'll call it M audio controller. And let's set a context property. So we'll say audio controller, we'll point to our M audio controller. All right, so now in our volume control component, let's go to our decrement button and let's add the functionality to audio controller dot increment volume, and we'll pass it a -1. And then down in our increment button, we'll change it to audio controller dot increment, and we'll give it a +1. And now if we run the application, we aren't going to see any kind of visual indicator that the volume is actually being adjusted. So let's set this icon Depending on what the volume is, let's adjust what the icon shows. All right, so here in our volume icon, instead of having a hard-coded audio 2, let's make this conditional. So let's do the mute first. So if audio controller dot volume level is less than or equal to 1, let's return this mute.png here, copy URL, and now else if audio controller dot volume level is less than or equal to 50, then we will return the audio1.png, and otherwise we will just return the audio2.png. All right, so the way that we have it set up, we're first going to check for the mute condition, and if it doesn't meet the mute condition, but it meets the volume level that's less than or equal to 50, we'll know that it's over 1. So we don't have to do an additional conditional statement here where we check less than or equal to 50 and greater than 1, because this already has said that it's not less than or equal to 1. Otherwise, if none of these conditions are met, then audio2.png will be shown. So let's run that and see how it works. All right, so we're seeing that it's muted here. And if we increase, all right, so we can see that it's increasing. So it starts off at this mute state. I think because we haven't set the initial value for audio level, yes, we didn't. So in our audio controller, let's first set it to M volume level. Let's set it to 51 so that it starts out with the audio 2, and then we can go down a couple clicks and see the audio 1 change. All right, so now we see that it's a level 2. If we go down 1, we can see now that it's this level 1, and if we go down a bunch of times,
2 hours later,
it should eventually go to mute. There we go. All right, so now we can see that it's at mute, and if we go up, we can see that it goes back to 1. So that's good. We have this icon that's conditional depending on the volume level, but what isn't good is, we don't know exactly where we are right now whenever we increment and decrement until we get to one of the bounds. So let's add a little bit of fanciness to this button to make it show the volume level whenever the volume level changes, very temporarily, and then show the icon again. Let's see, volume control component. Let's add some text here. Actually, we're going to grab the text from our HVAC component because I like the look of that. Let's grab this. And we'll go into our volume control, add it in here, and we'll call this volume text label. Okay, and the anchors will actually have it center in our volume icon. So volume icon. All right, so this text will have the audio controller dot volume level. All right, so at first we want it to have a visibility of false, and we only want to see the volume icon. And what we're going to do is anytime the volume level changes, we want this to show for, say, 1 second, then hide, and then show the volume icon. So let's create a connection here. Connections, and we'll target our audio controller. And we can hook into the signal. Let's go to our audio controller here, volume level changed. So we'll say function on volume level changed. First, let's make sure that we can grab it. Let's do test here. So now let's change the volume. Okay, good. Here we can see that anytime we increment or decrement, we are getting our debug out here of test. So let's change this to say volume icon dot visible is equal to false, and our text, which is our volume text label dot visible, equals to true. And now let's add a timer, and we'll just call this visible timer. We'll give it an interval of, let's say, 500 milliseconds. Set the single or set repeat to false so it doesn't keep repeating. And then on triggered. So whenever this 500 milliseconds is up, we'll say the volume icon we now want to be visible. And the volume text label we want to be not visible. And actually what we can do, instead of setting both of these together, since they are going to be opposite of one another, we can actually just go down to our volume text label, and instead of doing visible false, we'll have it as volume icon dot visible. So we'll have it the inverse of our volume icon visible. So whenever the volume icon is not visible, then the volume text label will be visible. But then when the volume icon is visible, this will become invisible again. So this is going to be false and this is going to be true. All right, so now all we need to do is set this timer whenever we set the visible to false. So let's do our visible timer dot start. All right, so now this should take care of it. Let's try that out. All right, so now if we decrement one, we can see it went down to 50, but then changed back really quick. 49, change back. I think I'll actually increase this to 1000, or yeah, 1000, which is a whole second. And I think we should actually stop the timer. So if we keep decrementing the visible timer, it doesn't start the timer over and over again and cause any issues. So let's first stop it in case it is running and then start it. And we'll actually just put that up there. So now let's try that out. All right, and now let's see, 50, good. And there was 1 second there. Sorry if you can hear my chickens in the background. They've decided that now is the time to start squawking. But let's try this out. Go all the way down to, let's just go to 5 for right now. And then wait. And then, yep, it went back here. So let's go down to 0 and it won't go past that. And look at that, we're there. And now let's go all the way up to 51 or 52. And there we go. This is now showing a the audio 2 image.